Many thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see some familiar names on there and also some new people too. So yeah, as Liz says, we have been struck down the dreaded lurgy. So I will try not to cough too much and just wondering how you're all coping at the moment and how your staffing levels are too, as it seems to hit a lot of my clients by storm, this nasty coldy bug thing. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about giving feedback. It's a topic I really like presenting, and we do this as a masterclass that's been very popular for us to either go into organisations and also deliver it as an open masterclass course. It's one of those areas that you'll find me quite often saying about HR. We make a lot of assumptions when people move into management that they can recruit, that they can interview. And a massive one is that they can give feedback. But again, it's a specific skill. It's also a very personal element because the feedback that you tend to give will be about something a person's done. So it could be quite personal in there. And a lot of the objections that I come up against with people is how to do it. And you can find even the most senior of people struggling to give some feedback sometimes. And, you know, I'll hold my hands up. A story that I recall during presentations is when in a personal part of my life, I actually had somebody helping around the house. And to give feedback to somebody that they weren't doing the job right, I found myself thinking, why have I got barriers here? And this is something I train and deliver in, but we all we're hopefully normalish people, and we come across these barriers, and it's human nature to walk away from that. And as I say, I've seen even the most senior people have a particular barrier in giving feedback. So it's a very essential part of management. I think it's an essential part of life in anything that we do. So I'm going to run through various parts of that, but it's a topic that I do really like. So for those of you that have heard me before and attended a webinar, went back, and you'll know a little bit about me. But for those of you who don't, I am an HR consultant by trade. Have a master's degree in HRM and a member of the CIPD. I'm also a qualified NLP practitioner. And at the moment, I run a consultancy in HR, and I also have a training business, the Business Springboard, with a colleague that we specialise in leadership and management development training. And one thing that we do really focus on is that we're all practitioners who train. So it's not textbook, it's real life stuff that we bring to the training facilities and really look to make change in organisations. So my key areas are management, leadership development, people management, and also soft skills in there as well. And as per normal, anything that I do give you as information here is designed as information and not specifically as advice on a particular problem that you have. So that's my disclaimer in there, and the copyright is to the Business Springboard. So moving on to the main body of the webinar, I'm going to talk about why and who should give feedback. And that's really quite important at the beginning because it can be, again, overlooked of where that should come from. And not only as managers should be given feedback, we should be looking for feedback too. I think it's a critical part in to measure success, to measure change, to measure a difference. And also the ultimate from it should be to take on board views and opinions and look for any possible changes we need to make in behaviour to reach a success criteria, whatever that may be. I'm also going to look about the difference between constructive feedback and praise and criticism, because this is where a lot of people fall down. We give too much praise and criticism, which is then highly emotional, and the actual value of the feedback is lost. I'm going to run through a couple of types of feedback and then very specifically then give some pointers on content, manner, timing and frequency. Now, as Liz said, you've got the chat box there open. Please do talk to me as we go through. And if there's a question crops up, I will answer it as we go along. If not, we've got some time at the end, because I've already got a couple of questions that have come through in advance. The poll that I put on at the beginning asked about if anybody had a structured process for giving feedback, and it was really interesting how that changed. It did stay around the 50-50 mark and didn't really vary an awful from that, slightly ending in favour of having a structured process in place. And that's really important as well. And I'd be interested for you to use the chat box, and just those of you who did say you did have structured thing in place, what is that you've got? So those of you that answered yes, if you could just give me some idea in the chat box of what structured system you have. Is that supervision sessions? Is it one-to-ones? Is it an appraisal system, etc., etc.? So that's just interesting. If as I start talking, you could let me know that, and then I'll pick on that as we go along. Okay, so firstly, why do we want to give the feedback? We've got to really look at what we're wanting to achieve, and that's a really key thing in identifying in this first place. Are we looking for a change in behaviour? Are we looking to meet a target? Are we looking to maintain a standard? Are we looking to keep high standards? Are we looking to create a culture? And I think we've really got to think, what do we want to achieve in the feedback? And all too often, if we haven't identified this, it can get mixed up in actually the message that we're trying to deliver. So if we don't take a step back and think, right, okay, for example, somebody is being consistently late. I need to let them know they're being consistently late. What do I want to achieve? Well, do I want to beat them with a big stick and make them feel bad? Or do I want them to get to come in on time? Hopefully the answer is I want them to come in on time. And that will dictate the type of feedback that you give and how you deliver that. So it's very important. It might seem really obvious, but to step back of what you were wanting to achieve in the starting point. And does it really make a difference when we give feedback? Well, all of the research out there is that feedback makes a massive difference to what we do, in the way that the culture that we have and also the performance that we see. People perform better when they know what we want them to do, how we want them to do it, and what the consequences will be, and also what the rewards will be if they do things in the right way. That's, very basic philosophy of management. That's how mounds of research out there to show us that. So yes, it does make a difference, and we need to think, what do we want to achieve that? Now, I see a lot of barriers around to feedback, and I put down a couple of there that I see all the time. I'm too busy being a manager. These days, managers tend to be functional managers. We have a day job as well as being a management job. So it's not that we sit in an office and we spend all our time on managing. We spend our time doing as well as managing. And in that, it can depend on where people actually place themselves, of where comfort zones are, because managers are, only normal people and have pressures and what have you. And if doing the day job takes over from that, then they can say, I'm too busy doing my day job to manage and give feedback. Also hear things like, she knows she's doing a good job, I don't have to tell her. Anybody who attended my performance management webinar a few weeks ago will know that I have quite a big thing that I bang on about all the time about managing good performance. And this is one area that's really often neglected. We see loads of courses around for managing poor performance. We see literature and articles and what have you. How much do you see about managing good performance? So good performance is what we want in our organisations, and we often neglect this area because it's working and it's working well, and we don't spend our management time here. But this is what we want. We need to give these people feedback. I did some appraisals not too long ago with an organisation, and they had one of their best employees in whatever best means, but they were very critical to the organisation, did a really good job. And the manager said to me, oh, this is going to be a really quick and easy one. Because she's good and she knows she's good, so I don't need to spend much time on it. I tell her every day that she does a good job. But in that formal appraisal setting, to sit down with your manager to say, thank you so much, you've done a really good job. When you did X, Y, and Z on these dates, it was really good, thank you. This lady left the room absolutely glowing, and she said to me afterwards, that made such a difference to be told how well I'm doing. Because it can go over our heads sometimes when we're here and, on an informal basis, and people like that formality. So on that point, just looking through some of your response there, that people do seem, those people that have got structured things, do have one-to-ones and appraisals. And that's really important when I'm going to come on to content manner and timing, about what we use for that. And perhaps having a little bit more structure in there can make a real difference. You might speak to people every day, but to have something structured is going to make a really big difference to the effect of the feedback. Another big one that I really often hear is if I pull them up on that, it'll be worse for the rest of the week. And I I honestly see this so much, and it's a bit of a fear and better the devil you know type approach to say, oh, they're not really good on this, but, they're going to be even worse if I pick them up on it. Well, no, we want to restore performance to that level. And if we don't give the feedback, how can they do that? And as I say, you will find that people will perform better when they know what's expected of them. And another very often one is that it's a petty little thing. I'll leave it for now. For example, use lateness again as a good example. They were 3 minutes late this morning. I won't pick it up because they'll think I'm being too picky. And then tomorrow they're 2 minutes late. And then the next day they're on time. It's great, so I don't say anything. And then the day after they're a minute late. And what I tend to see with these, managers avoid giving the feedback because they feel that it's being too petty. And then a few years, months down the line, they ring me and say, this has got ridiculous. This person is always late. Well, have you spoke to them about it? No, because it was always just little bits. And small problems become big problems. So we need to give feedback right at the beginning. Okay. So the thing that and I think this is the biggest part of giving feedback in really defining what constructive feedback is. And, it was a buzzword, wasn't it, constructive criticism a while ago. But the constructive part of it, all it means, the biggest piece of information I'm going to give you in the whole of this webinar is make feedback information specific. Really have it focused on the issue and based on observations, not feelings. Now, there's two reasons for doing this. One, as the person giving the feedback, it's so much easier to deliver if it's based on information and facts. It's harder for us to deliver if we have to make praise or criticism in there. The second reason is it's so much easier to accept when it's based on facts. Quite often, if you have the praise and criticism in there, people will get bogged down with that and you hit barriers. So let me put that into an example for you. And I'm going to use the lateness one because it's easy again. So you have an employee who is consistently late and you bring them in to the office. I need to talk about you. You're always late and it's upsetting the team and upsetting me. Okay. Probably the first response will be barrier. No, I'm not always late. It's a couple of minutes for being picky. Upsetting the team. Everybody else seems happy with me. I don't know what they want from me. I stayed back 5 minutes late. I make up the time. And this is all going on internally with the person and they're not actually listening to anything else that you say. If that situation was addressed of, okay, over the last week, I've wrote down your start times. On Monday, you came in at 9:04. On Tuesday, 9:03. On Wednesday, I actually got here at 9, which was good. On Thursday, you got in at 8:59. Brilliant. But on Friday, you got in at 9:10. So out of the week, on 3 occasions, you were late. We need to see you change and get you here at 9 o'clock to start work. That information's been far more detailed, but it's so information specific, it's hard to wriggle out of it. It's hard to not take the core information in that conversation and take it on board and make a change. You are lessening the impact of barriers coming up and conversations going off in directions that you don't want to get into that emotions. So biggest piece sounds really simple, but really think it through and think with your managers about that information specific. Keep it focused on that. Base it on observations and not feelings in there. The feelings then come into it because praise and criticism are good and they need to be tagged on the end, but it shouldn't be all about it. So for example, over the week you've been late on these 3 occasions, these are the start times. It's disappointing that we're in this situation, or your team members are feeling let down. So there's some criticism in there. Likewise with the positive stuff, if you just say, you did really well yesterday, thank you. That person might, puff the feathers up and feel all nice and good about it, but do they know what actually was good performance so they can replicate it? But if you say, the report you did yesterday and the way you spoke to that customer on the phone that I listened to at lunchtime was brilliant, well done, the content was fantastic, I'm really pleased. You're actually pointing out what the good behaviour was, what you want to see more of, and you've given that specific praise for it. So really, I say, I can't emphasise that enough, that is such a key part of it. So try and keep away from just the praise and criticism and focus on that information specific. It makes delivering it so much easier, and it also means accepting it so much easier. Okay, when we're looking at feedback, there's obviously positive and negative feedback, but negative isn't negative in the true sense of the word, because what we should always be looking at when we manage performance is restoring performance to an acceptable level. So when we give negative feedback, it doesn't mean that it's terrible. In some cases it might, but in general, it won't always mean a terrible performance. So you can pick up on those, slight shortfalls sometimes. What it's actually saying is that things could be better, things could be at better levels, something that we find acceptable. So, yep, it's a bit negative, but it's not devastating and it's not terrible. So bear that in mind, because it's easier to deliver when you know you're not saying something absolutely terrible. What you want out of it, and this comes back to why you're giving the feedback. If you go in with a very negative approach, and there will be some times where you have got a negative outcome in mind, but the first slant should be that you're restoring things to an acceptable level. Obviously, positive feedback is about an effort or a job well done, and that's what we're looking at. Okay. Bear with me 1 second. So when we give constructive feedback, remember it's information specific. The things that, and some guidelines that I want to give you fall into these 4 areas. So what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and how often we say it. So firstly, looking at the content. What you say is absolutely key, and as I say, relate this back to the information I've just given you about what you want as an outcome and the information in there. So we do have to do our research. And another good way of having a structured approach to giving feedback, like one-to-ones or your appraisals, is that you do your homework first. Get the facts together. I had a personal issue with school with one of my sons where the headmistress, and I think she really fell down on this because she pulled my son up about something without getting all the facts, and it just made her look silly. He didn't take any of it on board, and it made me a very frustrated parent to be in the schoolyard, and not good to be around me when I'm like that. But actually what you say, do your homework, get stuff together, get your information. Now, one of the questions relates to this that I had before the webinar, but there was a school of thought, and I'm sure you've heard it, about the SHIT sandwich, quite widely well known. I'm not a fan of this. This gives them bad news, good news, bad news, or good news, bad news, good news. So I'm not a fan of this because we don't want to dress things up. We want to get to the facts. We want to make a difference, make a change, either positively or negatively. So I'm really not a fan of doing this, good, bad, good. I don't want the bad to get lost. The bad is important. Likewise, the good is important. So let's not dress it up at all. Just identify when you first speak to somebody the topic or issue of the feature that you're going to be talking about. Provide the specifics, and without them you only have praise and criticism. And as we've already said, that's harder to deliver and harder to accept because it raises the barriers in there. So don't worry about dressing things up. Don't beat around the bush. I can guarantee you if you sit in it to give somebody some negative feedback and you try to skirt around it and do the good stuff, your mind is going to be focused on that one line of negative and you'll be losing the value of the positive anyway. So let's not beat around it. Let's identify it, deal with it, and give the feedback. Second thing, and very importantly, is the manner in which you give that. Sorry, next slide. Next one. Sorry, Liz isn't keeping up there. I'll give her some feedback at the end of the session. So what we say in the way that we say it is very, very important. Depending on which study you look at, you'll get some different statistics, but around 70% of the information that's received and understood comes from non-verbal cues. So it's how you say things, your tone, your manner, the emphasis on the words, your assertiveness and how you put that across. Again, being information specific, I know from experience this really helps keep your manner in a consistent way. So the actual way you say it will carry much more weight than what you say. I'm speaking to you just over the telephone today, so you're losing a lot of my communication. But, an example, if I said, it was my birthday last week and I had this really small cake. Even from the way I'm talking, you kind of thinking there's an extremes in the size of that. And if you could see me doing some hand gestures of a very big size, you'd probably think the cake was absolutely huge and not small. So think about how you say things. Be direct. Think about the language you use because, the need tos and the tries are giving people an out. So, oh, you need to try with your attendance, try harder. Well, I tried, you asked me to try, I tried and I still couldn't get here. How can you tell me off for that? You asked me to try and I've tried. So they also need to, you need to do more. Well, yeah, we need to, but actually want you to do it. So we need sentences that actually portray what we want. Be sincere and avoid giving mixed messages. In management roles, we put some information across, and this is where the boundaries, and I sometimes have this with people who've been part of the team that then go into managing a team and redefining those boundaries about friendships and etc., etc. There needs to be a line of management and respect. I think respect's quite key in there. So it's about the culture also of the organisation. In positive feedback sessions where you're giving good stuff, really, you can add on that praise at the end after you've done the information specific. It's nice to get the well dones and I'm happy. And in negative, I've used the word concern there. Again, this isn't big sticks. This isn't shaming people. It's about concern. It's worrying me that you're constantly late. Is there anything we can do to sort this out in your personal life, at work, etc., etc.? What's the reasons behind it? Always think about giving feedback person to person. The reason being in that is the way that you will deliver it. It wants to be very focused on the people in that session. It's not a show for other people. Your attention should be focused on that person. Now, as well, this isn't always possible. There will be sometimes where you've got to give feedback to people over the phone who are in different locations. Think about your communication in there. And very important, observations, not interpretations. So, you're always late. I think you don't care about this job. That's my interpretation of it. It might be they're always late because they're caring for a loved one at home and can't get here. Or it might be that their car broke down, etc., etc. Keep away from personal judgments in the manner. Okay, so that's really important. The timing. When we should acknowledge any good or bad behaviour, and this should be as soon as possible after the event to have the maximum effect from it. Now, if you have a structured system for delivering feedback, and a lot of people who replied to that said they do have an appraisal system, they would, I expect, and please tell me if I'm wrong, be annually, 6 monthly, etc., etc. I wouldn't personally advise having an appraisal system longer than a month apart, and I wouldn't do it sooner than 6 months. Oh, sorry, yeah, you need to flip on, Liz. Sorry. Thanks, Louise. Sorry about that one. I lost my yes, appraisal systems. I wouldn't have one longer than a year apart, and I wouldn't have them more frequent than 6 months because there should be a formal system that records it. But in between that doesn't mean you don't talk for that 12 months or 6 months in it. So there needs to be something regularly, and my biggest thing here is keep records, keep notes. I always tell managers, have a people management book that's kept according to data protection. So, because if you're going to write personal information about people, use separate sheets for each people, keep it in a locked cabinet, etc., etc. But make some observations as you go through. Don't rely on memory to give feedback in a structured appraisal, but also do it then. There should be no shocks and surprises in an appraisal. It should be, right, we're looking, for example, over the past year. In February, we sat down because you'd had that brilliant customer feedback, and that was excellent. In March, you reached your sales target. In July, you hit your production targets, etc., etc. But it should be you should have already told them through the year, and the manager should already keep them up to date. So keep a record of the feedback. But if anything specifically happens, make sure you address that there and then. I always liken so much of management to parenting, and if you think of child, when they've done something good or bad, you need to tell them as soon as possible to it, or animals for that point of view, when you're doing your dog training, to get a difference from it, and that's what we want to see. We've got to link the behaviour to the consequences, be that good or bad. Also, you need to be fresh in your mind, so relying on facts in there too. Okay, so finally, frequency. Now, I've touched on this slightly there about how often should we give feedback. For your formal appraisals, as I said, I personally wouldn't be looking less frequent than a year or more frequent than 6 monthly. And the rest of that around it for your personal PTPs or your one-to-ones, it depends on the nature of the business and the nature of the role. There will be some organisations where there's a daily one-to-one session, some are weekly, monthly, etc., etc. It needs to fit with you. The last thing I'd want to see if we set up a structure for giving feedback and we didn't adhere to it, it's going to do you more harm as a management team than not. So it's got to be something that's achievable. It's got to be very specific and it's got to work with the business. So it'll depend on the type of role, the gestation period, for example. If you were a call centre where they had daily targets, it might be appropriate to have daily one-to-ones. But if you're managing 100 people who make a product that takes a month to complete, it's going to be very different. So it needs to fit in with you. What I would say is have that very structured. We don't have meetings for meeting's sake, and then don't need to take up our too much of our working time for managers or for the employees. So, for example, I'm working with an organisation at the moment where we're setting up weekly management meetings. Some managers will attend by Skype, and they're going to get feedback about the organisations and give feedback to the rest of the teams. Because remember, feedback isn't just about subordinates, it's about teams and about what's going on in the organisation, etc., etc. In that management meeting, we're having a set structure with time limits on that, so each manager will give a 5-minute feedback for each department. We will cover general people management, the organisation, health and safety, finance, etc., and keep it to a very structured and set time scale. All too often, again, these things can fall over, if you schedule in weekly one-to-ones, and before you know it, in a couple of weeks, the manager's saying, it's taking up 2 hours of my time, it's too much, I'm not getting the value. We're getting sidetracked and talk about what we do at the weekend. It needs to be structured, needs to have a format. Another key thing, it needs to be recorded. It needs to be, however this may be to fit in the organisation. I'm a big fan of happy sheets, just a one side of A4 with some tick boxes, just some record of that meeting of the feedback, and make sure your measures and controls are in there correctly as well. So if performance hits target, it's reflected as hitting target. If the performance is just below, it's reflected as just below. Just to finally wrap up, but it's a whole other webinar, the keeping records information. If you manage performance, is really critical to go back on there if you were challenged on anything that you've given correct feedback at the correct time. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of giving feedback. So the really important bit that I want you to take away is the information specific and do some research in there. Now, I've already had one question in from Kate, who said, I have a senior team who are reluctant to give negative feedback. The performance reviews that they complete every year are always very positive, and therefore need some tips on how to encourage them to give balanced feedback. Now, firstly, before I go into how to give this balanced feedback, it's worrying as an HR professional to see this, and you're not alone there, Kate, because I see this so much, where the manager wants to be the nice manager and the liked manager, struggles giving negative feedback, so their performance appraisals are always very positive. I've been in a situation where I attended a tribunal with a client where the appraisals were just that. They found the employee a very strong person who didn't receive criticism very readily. So the appraisal all said she was absolutely great. So when she was dismissed for her performance, it came as a big shock to the tribunal that how can you dismiss this person fairly when the appraisal says she was very, very good. So that's an issue for organisations for the risk that they've got. What I would recommend is that I would bring them together as a team for your senior managers and deliver some training on them about giving negative feedback, and do that scenarios of information specific and run through how we can actually pull out the facts and how we can structure that to give that information in the way that it should be delivered, and also looking at the taken notes. So my biggest tip in that one will be ensure that you are information specific on that negative, and that the managers also understand the risks of having that recorded in a feedback. And ultimately, I guess you want to see a change in performance, and that people need this feedback. So I would recommend that that's done. Okay, another one from Chris. Would you recommend feedback on the floor or off floor? Um, it depends on how much feedback you're given and if it's general, and how personal it is in there. We've always got to consider the environment for the person and the effect you want to get out of it. And I think it's very good to showcase good performance to other people. But bear in mind the type of person that you're giving it to, and some people get embarrassed by that. If it's bad performance, again, we're not looking to shame in people, because if you do that, their emotions are going to get caught up in the shame and how they feel and the resentment, rather than taking the feedback on board. So I think you've got to have a balance there, Chris, to what you want to achieve about it and what level of feedback that you're giving. I think it's really positive for the team members to see that managers are dealing with issues and also give praise where praise need be. So I think there's some element that should be given on the floor, but there's certain issues that need to be done in a different environment where you're going to get the maximum effect from that. Victoria, what about attitude, which is very difficult to feedback on? Any suggestions? Yeah, absolutely key, because attitude is a personal trait. Again, I would bring this back to the evidence of how the effects of the attitude. So again, if you say to somebody, you've got a really bad attitude, defences come straight up. But if you say, for example, I gave you a task to do, and you huffed and blowed and stormed off and didn't speak to me for a week. That isn't helping the team and other people seeing it, and I felt very disappointed. You're pulling it back to the specific observations that were an effect of the attitude. So I think you need to look at that information in there to get the specifics out of it. Um, it is difficult with attitude, because sometimes you can't put your finger on the exact bits and pieces, but you must be seeing something that is displeasing you with that performance. So pull out the actual observations from things that are happening from the effect of the attitude to make it very information specific and less personal. Yeah, a similar question there. How do you give feedback to someone who is very argumentative towards any negative feedback? It's far harder to argue with information specific, so I would keep it very information specific. And if you have a structured way to do that and deliver the feedback, think about where you give it, who it's in front of, who's in the room giving the feedback when you do that. Try and break down those barriers to the argumentative side of it. So if you'd find that person perhaps likes a bit of a show when they argue, which some people do, then I wouldn't give this feedback on the floor, because you're not going to win that argument. You're going to get more far negatives. You might say win the, what's the saying, win the battle but lose the war, for example. I would take away the barriers to the argumentative side. So that could be the location, the physical sides of it. Think about the very information specific and put the facts there. So again, if it's sales figures, if it's lateness, if you can put that across. If you went into an argumentative person and said you're always late, they're probably going to come back and go, no, I'm not, and even if I am, it's just a minute and it's not my fault, the bus is late, etc., etc. If you go back and say, right, our start times and contractually is this time, I've noticed over the last 2 weeks, here's your start times, they've fallen short of what we need you to do, then it's far harder for the person to be argumentative and actually take on the facts of the feedback. Barbara, any idea on how to help develop a culture of giving feedback in a public sector organisation? This, I think, changing the culture doesn't happen overnight, and a lot of doing that, I would be looking to, firstly, train and develop the managers and actually do some very structured settings in there. Now, it's interesting because probably public sector may have, and correct me if I'm wrong, some very structured means to give feedback, but is it actually achieving what you want to? Sometimes we can overstructure things, and we need to be very careful. So think about the system that you have in place, and does it actually work? We don't want it to be an exercise for feedback, but actually in there it's not given in the right way. So it needs to be, it's a bit hard to give a specific advice without looking at it. Let me just see if there's something else coming there. So I would think about the managers and how they're training and feedback. Look at your systems and what you've got in place to do that. And look at, as the organisation, what do you reward and encourage? So how you reward-based systems structured in that way, because they all need to reflect on that. Eloise, how would you empower management to have difficult conversations that include feedback? We have a guidance manual and provide advice, but managers often backtrack and end up not being as direct as they should. Yeah, very common issue, Eloise. And you do find it, and I think it needs to be part of the management feedback, because remember, in this, we need to manage our managers, and we need to give them very specific feedback. The starting point in any performance management, because it is a management capability, is to set the objectives for the managers, ensure they have the tools to carry this out. And in tools, I mean that they have the correct skills in there. They have the facilities, like the structures that we put in place. They have the office space, etc., to do it right down to that. But I would see that as a training issue, and it's like many management skills. We do a lot of presuming that managers are capable of doing these things, but without giving them the skills to do it. And we need a very structured way to give managers feedback to ensure they're hitting their objectives. So it will come back to, your performance measurements for managers, your assessment measurements for managers, and your feedback tools for your managers to ensure that's in there too, and managing their performance. Sarah, what about repeated sickness, absence, or going home sick halfway through the day? Again, information specific, have your facts and figures there. One thing with sickness absence, and those of you who have attended a webinar that I've done on this, it's a bit of one of my passions, because there's an awful lot we can do about it. But until we plot out what it means and actually look at it and have the information, it can be either that we think there's a problem with people who do have a problem, that don't have a problem, or we think somebody who's hiding in the corner but is really off sick isn't. So information, measure your attendance, keep records, keep logs, plotted on a calendar, because the amount of them we can see patterns there of Monday, Fridays, and or a particular day in the week that somebody's off sick. It needs to be very information specific. I'd also be looking in there if it was with somebody specific who'd had a lot of short-term absence, either managing it through a structured system or taking any further medical advice, obviously considering DDA, etc., etc. So I do a lot of information gathering on that one for Sarah, and then make sure you have your facts and information before you sit down with the person on there. So that has been a lot of debate. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and something that does generate an awful lot of discussion. As I said, as the Business Springboard, we do run a series of masterclasses that we have on our website. The address is on there. We have actually got a given feedback coming up next week on the 18th, which we do have a couple of spaces on. That's in Yorkshire. But we'll deliver around the course, around the country, and also in-house as well. It's an area I'm really passionate on. We tend to do these masterclass sessions with small groups to allow a lot of coaching and interaction, and very importantly, action planning. What I want to see is a change in management skills and a development in that to see a real difference to your staff. If I know the majority of people on the webinar today are HR managers, if this is anything that you want your managers to listen to, because I would specifically, this is what you want to see, by all means share the slides with them, get them to listen to the recording, and if it's anything you want to have a further conversation with me on, then by all means catch up with me and contact me on LinkedIn through Joanne Vose or through the website at the Business Board, and I'd love to talk to you further on it. But for now, thank you so much. It's been great to have that interaction and discussion, and remember, information specific. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Liz.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joanne. I wonder if I get information specific on keeping up with those slides this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Fabulous to see you all again. Hope you got a lot of stuff out of that like myself, like I did. There's a couple of slides there with regards to next week's webinar, which is going to be on unfair dismissal. It's a final in our series. It's focused on redundancy with barrister Helen Gardinier. And then the following week we'll be looking at managing change with Barbara Nixon. So that just leaves me to the end of the webinar to say thank you very, very much for joining, and hopefully you'll all be competent and confident at the whole feedback thing now. So take care and see you all again soon. Thank you.